If you've struggled with mental health issues at all in your life, then you're probably aware that there's a stigma around talking about it or seeking help for mental health issues. What may surprise you is that some mental health providers are perpetuating that stigma and making it worse. Keep watching because I'm going to go over how to identify if your provider is perpetuating the stigma around mental health. Welcome back to our channel, Real Talk Mental Health, where we discuss mental health treatment from the provider's perspective. I'm Piper Bursmeyer, a psychiatric mental health nurse practitioner in Vancouver, Washington. You may find this episode intriguing and may spark some questions. Leave a comment. We do read all of them. Give us a follow and like if you like the insider info. Now let's talk about stigma. First, from a perspective we're all familiar with, society's stigma. So I'm going to go over some stigmas that you may have experienced already or you heard or have been told. And some can be pretty triggering. So let's get to it. Mental health is a weakness. You shouldn't need medication. And if you do, one medication should be enough. Supplements and lifestyle changes should be enough. There's complete ignorance to genetic predispositions for people and the idea that we're all created equal with all the same playing field. Ignoring implications and consequences of trauma. The idea that society tells us that our trauma doesn't matter and we should be strong and push through, and that doesn't impact our mental health. That's so far from the truth. Society's expectation that financial stress should have no implication on your mental health access, treatment, and options for medication. When if you're actually in and seeking treatment in the field, you will find that your insurance coverage and financial situation drastically impacts your ability to access adequate care. But what if I told you your provider is actually perpetuating this stigma? This is something that's really not talked about, not from providers, not really even from most people in general, because this idea that providers could be perpetuating the stigma goes against everything that we believe from providers. Now, I want to make this clear. Providers, for the most part, all go into this field because they want to serve others and they want to do their best. However, providers are not at all immune to stigma and pressure from society and from their own personal biases. And when I kind of go over this section, I want you to understand that providers can do these things. It's not necessarily to be malicious or to be hurtful, but the point is, if you've experienced any of these things I'm about to talk about, these could be signs that your provider is part of the issue with stigma. So something that providers may do is making the assumption that their treatment plan is enough for you and that they put the rest on you as a client to improve. So they might say things like mind over matter, or that the mind's really powerful and that you have to will yourself, or that you need to exercise or eat better, or that you need to make drastic changes in your life to, all of a sudden take care of your mental health issues. But this doesn't always work, and your provider needs to trust in your instincts and hear what you are saying, the barriers you face, the challenges you face, and things that you've tried that are not working. Another thing that you might experience from providers who are perpetuating this stigma is this hesitation with treating their clients with a mix of the best medications for their conditions and or best treatment modalities. So this might be a mix of medications and therapy, TMS, Spravato, functional medicine. So when we start talking about medications in general, and we talk about in the medical side of the world, we think about clients with a multitude of issues. Let's take a client example with hypertension, which is high blood pressure, high cholesterol, or diabetes altogether. So let's say they have these three conditions from a medical standpoint. There's pretty much little or to no expectation that these clients will be stable on one medication. And in fact, most of these medications, clients that end up on medications take quite a few to target different areas. So a medication that might be for diabetes will be different than hypertension or high blood pressure or hyperlipidemia or high cholesterol. And that's accepted, and it's not really ever questioned. So I would like to understand from myself as a provider, why in mental health do we expect mental health clients to be stable with one medication? monotherapy seems to be considered the gold standard for many trainings and providers who, especially in the pediatric and or adolescent population, this idea that we should only require or need one medication. And that's just not fact. That's just not common. And so taking a mix of the best medications for the condition at the right dose at the right time does not necessarily mean polypharmacy. Taking the right medication at the right dose and right time to work synergistically together is the key often in stabilizing clients and maximizing results. The unwillingness to consider the mix of medications, or to be what I call a mixologist, is unfortunate, and further continues the stigma that it's a patient's weakness or problem and why they're not getting better, when in fact many patients are often undertreated. There's this idea in society that we're over-treating and over-medicating, but as a specialist we often see the opposite. Now, providers also who have an unwillingness to consult with experts in the field regarding other options, in particular I'm going to refer to, again, TMS, Spravato, naturopathic care, endocrinologists, functional medicine, even psychedelic medication providers. When a provider is unwilling to think about the patient as a whole and different modalities or treatment that they need, this further continues a stigma that their idea of the treatment plan is enough, when in fact it often takes a mix of targeting multiple areas in multiple ways. And the sad part of this stigma piece is this idea that we have full control over what our body does, and unfortunately we just don't, or what our mind does, frankly. The brain is very complex, and we're just coming to understand the implications of gut health, how gut health impacts mental health, how exercise impacts mental health, nutrition, sleep, relationships, work, your financial status, your environmental exposures, how all of these things impact how our genes are actually expressed, which is called epigenetics. It's absolutely fascinating. And this idea that a provider would be able to, control for all of these factors in a person is just impossible. And this is one provider. And so you need a provider to be collaborative. You need a provider who's willing to think outside the box, and if they struggle with this, consulting. And a provider who avoids conditions they're uncomfortable with. In particular, we see this with ADHD. And making the assumption that ADHD patients are drug seekers and treating them as such, this perpetuates stigma. So you might see this with ADHD clients as requiring, monthly, urine analysis, looking for, abuse, making the assumption that someone is abusing their stimulants, which is very unfortunate, and treating them as such. We see this in society with, sometimes pharmacists, pharmacist technician, family members. Everyone seems to have an opinion about ADHD. Although stimulants are some of the most well-studied medications on the market, with some of the most effective data showing a high effectiveness. So, we see the stigma from providers that, they may not provide a stimulant until you've failed all other non-stimulants, although there's no evidence to suggest that's appropriate, and frankly, stimulants are gold standard. Now, of course, if there's reasons why you shouldn't be on a stimulant, and there can be some, it may not be the initial treatment for you, but we've seen this time and time again. We've also seen providers who avoid filling mail order, which is 90 days, or providing 3 prescriptions to their local pharmacy for a 3-month supply, although the client's completely stable. Creating barriers to care in general is perpetuating stigma, because society already does that. When providers, choose to be unreachable between visits, this often leads to clients making their own medication changes because they just don't feel good or they're concerned. And when they make these changes and they go back to their provider, they're often shamed. And this, again, perpetuates the stigma that patients don't know what they're doing, and that they can't be an advocate for their care, when in fact, our patients are our source of information. Because it's the brain and because it's hard to measure, we heavily rely on our patients to guide their treatment. And it's really important that they're part of the treatment team. Now, hearing all of this, it kind of feels like, oh man, this is exactly what I've experienced. I feel overwhelmed, and is this ever going to get better? We've made significant strides in stigma, frankly, from a society standpoint, from a provider and medical standpoint, but unfortunately, stigma is not going to go away on its own. We've made these improvements, but it continues to be a sticking point, and it comes and rears its ugly head very frequently. But I will tell you, as a consumer and a patient yourself, by choosing to find a provider who's not perpetuating the stigma helps to end the stigma. Say something. If you see something, say something. It's intimidating and scary to sometimes to talk to your provider about your feelings or your experience. And I have been humbled by my own patients who might point things out that, Piper, when you do this, it made me feel this way. Or, hey, when you said this, this is how I experienced this. Is this what you meant? Sometimes checking in with your provider is extremely helpful, getting clarification on their intent. Sometimes as providers, we may say things that we don't understand the implications for you or how it triggers you or maybe even upsets you. And I think assuming that we're all good and we all mean well, because most people, I believe, that are inherently good. And sometimes it can be a misunderstanding and miscommunication. And sometimes it can be a disagreement. But if we work to hear each other and work to focus on, decreasing the stigma, from both a society and provider standpoint, I think we'll make huge strides in our field. Because frankly, mental health is health care. It's not this random, voodoo thing that we don't understand. The brain, of course, is extremely complex and there's so much more to learn, but I promise you, there is data and experienced providers who know what they're doing and will do everything they can to get you better. And if you're not with a provider who makes you feel that way, there's a lot of options for you. Telemedicine has exploded since COVID, and please understand that, finding a provider who meets your needs is possible. And having different providers' perspectives is key. And know that we're doing our best, we care for you, and we want you to be your best self. So hopefully that was helpful. It's always great being in front of the camera with you guys. I hope this was really valuable, and I will see you soon.